A dentist earning $300,000 a year just filed for bankruptcy. A janitor making $35,000 died with $8 million. This isn't a feel-good story. It's a pattern repeating thousands of times every year. And the reason has almost nothing to do with how much money comes in. High income and actual wealth use completely opposite skill sets. Most high earners never realize that until their 50s. The high earner runs a treadmill, exhausting, but going nowhere. The low earner steps onto an escalator and lets time do the work. One behavior compounds silently, the other one eats itself. In the next 25 minutes, I'll show you the exact 3 behaviors separating them and how to switch tracks starting today. The problem is that most high earners spend their entire lives optimizing the treadmill. They run faster, they upgrade to a better treadmill, they add features, and they never even look at the escalator behind them because the treadmill feels like progress. It feels like winning. Every promotion is proof. Every raise is validation. Every bonus is confirmation that you're doing it right. Your brain releases dopamine with each increase. You feel successful because the number keeps going up. But that number is just speed. It's not distance. It's not destination. It's just how fast you're running in place. The low earner never gets fooled by the treadmill because they can't afford one. They're forced to look for another way. And when they find the escalator, when they start putting away even small amounts consistently, they discover something the high earner never learns. Movement doesn't require effort. It requires direction. Here's what happens at a psychological level when your income jumps. Let's say you go from making $60,000 to $120,000. That's double. You just won. Your brain registers this as success, as arrival, as proof that you've made it. And then something automatic happens. Your lifestyle expands to meet it. Not because you're irresponsible, not because you're trying to show off, but because your identity shifts. You now think of yourself as a person who makes $120,000. And people who make $120,000 don't live like people who make $60,000. They don't drive that car. They don't live in that neighborhood. They don't wear those clothes or take those vacations. This isn't about vanity, it's about consistency. Your brain craves alignment between who you think you are and how you live. When there's a gap, it creates psychological tension. The easiest way to resolve that tension is to spend up to your identity. The low earner doesn't have this problem. Someone making $35,000 already knows they can't afford most things. There's no identity to protect, no image to maintain. If they manage to save $5,000 a year, that's not an identity statement. It's just what they did. And because there's no lifestyle creep to fund, that $5,000 actually stays saved. But there's something deeper here. When your income increases, your reference point shifts. You stop comparing yourself to where you were. You start comparing yourself to where you think you should be. You look at people who've been at this income level longer. You notice what they have. And suddenly your doubled income doesn't feel like enough. It feels like you're behind. This is the cruel irony of achievement. The moment you arrive somewhere, the goalpost moves. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your entire life chasing a finish line that retreats at the exact speed you advance. The math nobody talks about. Let's run the numbers simply because this is where it gets brutal. Person A earns $150,000 a year. After taxes, they take home about $100,000. They live in a nice area, so rent or mortgage is $3,000 a month. That's $36,000. Car payments, insurance, and maintenance for a respectable vehicle, another $12,000. They eat well, travel occasionally, have subscriptions, maintain appearances. By the end of the year, they've spent $95,000. They saved $5,000. Person B earns $40,000 a year. After taxes, they take home about $32,000. They live modestly. Rent is $900 a month, $10,800 for the year. They drive an old car they own outright, maybe $2,000 in maintenance and insurance. They're careful with everything else. They spend $24,000 total. They saved $8,000. Person A, who earns nearly 4 times as much, saved less. And this continues year after year. After 10 years, Person A has saved $50,000, assuming they never had an emergency, never increased their lifestyle further, never felt the pressure to keep up as their peers bought homes and took bigger trips. Person B has $80,000, and if they did anything with that money, if they put it somewhere it could grow at even 7%, they're not just ahead. They're on an entirely different trajectory, because now the escalator is moving. But let's extend this further because the real devastation happens over decades. After 20 years, if Person A maintains that $5,000 annual savings, they have $100,000 saved. Person B, saving $8,000 annually with 7% growth, has $328,000. Person A earned $2.4 million more over those 20 years, and they're behind by over $200,000. After 30 years, the gap becomes a canyon. Person A has $150,000 in savings if they never invested it. If they did invest at 7%, they have $472,000. Person B has over $765,000. The person who earned less than a third of the income has 60% more wealth. And here's what really matters. Person B can stop working. Person A cannot. Person B has options. Person A has obligations. Person B has 15 years of expenses saved. Person A has maybe 5. That's only if they dramatically cut their lifestyle, which they won't do because they can't do it without feeling like they've failed. The social pressure layer. There's another force at work here that almost never gets discussed. High earners exist in high spending environments. The people you work with, the people you're trying to impress or simply keep pace with, they're spending aggressively, and humans are social animals. We calibrate normal based on what we see around us. If everyone at your office drives a nice car, your paid-off Honda feels like failure. If your colleagues are buying homes in certain neighborhoods, renting somewhere cheaper feels like moving backward. If they're sending their kids to specific schools or taking specific trips, you feel the pull. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. Low earners don't operate in these environments. The social pressure exists, but it's not tied to spending. No one expects you to show up in luxury when you work a modest job. There's freedom in that. Freedom to make decisions based on math instead of perception. But the social pressure for high earners goes beyond just keeping up. There's an expectation of generosity. You make good money, so you pick up the check. You cover rounds. You're expected to contribute more to group gifts, to chip in more for events. And saying no feels cheap. It feels like you're betraying the level you've reached. Then there's the advice economy. When you earn well, everyone around you has suggestions for how you should spend. Financial advisors tell you about whole life insurance and complex investment products with high fees. Real estate agents show you what you qualify for, not what you should buy. Car dealers calculate payments based on your income, designing them to consume exactly what you can afford. You're surrounded by sophisticated systems designed to separate you from your money. And they work because they speak the language of someone at your level. They make spending feel like the smart move, the mature move, the move that someone successful makes. The skill mismatch. Here's a reversal most people miss. The skills that make you a high earner are often the exact opposite of the skills that build wealth. To earn a lot, you need to signal competence. You need to look the part. You need to network, to be visible, to invest in your appearance and presence. You need to live near opportunity, which means expensive cities. You need to spend money to make money, or at least that's the operating belief. To build wealth, you need to be invisible. You need to ignore signals. You need to be comfortable with people thinking you earn less than you do. You need to have zero ego about your car, your address, your clothes. You need to optimize for tomorrow instead of today. These are contradictory skills, and most people can't hold both at the same time, so they choose the one that feels like progress. They choose the one that gets rewarded socially. They optimize for income, and they let wealth slip away. Consider what it takes to get promoted. You need to be confident, assertive, willing to advocate for yourself. You need to demonstrate value, make your achievements visible, ensure people notice what you've done. You're rewarded for standing out. Now consider what it takes to build wealth. You need to be humble, patient, willing to delay gratification. You need to hide your wins, avoid lifestyle inflation, ensure people don't know what you have. You're rewarded for blending in. The personality traits are opposites. The person skilled at climbing income ladders is almost by definition unskilled at building wealth. They've spent years training themselves to do the exact wrong things. The identity lock. There's a concept in psychology called identity-based habits. The idea is simple. You don't just do things. You do things because of who you believe you are. And once the behavior becomes tied to your identity, it's almost impossible to change without changing how you see yourself. High earners build an identity around being high earners. The spending isn't incidental. It's proof. Proof to themselves and others that they've succeeded. And if you tell them to cut back, you're not asking them to change their budget. You're asking them to change their identity. You're asking them to admit they're not who they thought they were. Low earners who build wealth do something different. They build an identity around being someone who saves, someone who doesn't need much, someone who's smart with money. That becomes their pride. That becomes their proof. And once that identity locks in, the behavior becomes automatic. You don't have to convince yourself to save every month. You save because that's who you are. It's not discipline, it's identity. Think about how you introduce yourself at social gatherings. High earners lead with their job, their title, their company. That's their identity. They've worked hard for it. It means something. And everything they do needs to support that identity. Low earners who build wealth often lead with something else entirely. A hobby, a family role, an interest. Their identity isn't tied to their income, so their spending doesn't need to prove anything. They're free to save, because saving doesn't threaten who they think they are. This identity lock explains why lottery winners go broke. They come into millions, but their identity hasn't changed. They're still the person who grew up without money, who lived a certain way, who has certain friends and family with certain expectations. The money creates tension with their identity, and instead of changing their identity, they spend until the tension resolves, until they're broke again and everything aligns. High earners do the reverse. They earn more, their identity upgrades, and they spend until everything aligns. The mechanism is identical. The outcome is the same. The money disappears, not because of math, but because of identity, the attention economy. Here's what else happens when you earn more. Your attention gets expensive. Your time feels valuable because someone is paying well for it. So you start outsourcing everything else. You pay for convenience. You pay to avoid tasks. You pay for services that save you time. This makes sense in theory. If you make $100 an hour, why would you spend an hour doing something you could pay someone $20 to do? You're ahead $80. But that logic only works if you'd actually be earning during that hour. And most of the time, you wouldn't be. You'd be watching TV or scrolling or doing nothing productive. So you're not saving time. You're just spending money. Low earners can't afford this trap. They have to cook their own meals, clean their own homes, fix their own problems. And in doing so, they maintain a connection to the actual cost of things. They know what labor is worth because they're doing it. High earners lose this connection. They stop knowing what things cost in time and effort. Everything becomes an abstraction. And when you can't feel the weight of your spending, you can't control it. There's also a compounding effect. When you outsource everything, you lose skills. You stop being able to cook, to clean efficiently, to fix basic problems. So you become dependent on the outsourcing. You can't go back, even if you wanted to, because you no longer know how. The optimization paradox. High earners are optimizers. They're good at finding edges, maximizing returns, improving systems. That's often why they're high earners in the first place. But they apply this optimization to the wrong things. They optimize their career. They find the highest paying jobs, negotiate raises, switch companies for better offers. They're ruthlessly efficient at increasing income. But they don't optimize their spending. They don't track expenses with the same intensity. They don't negotiate their rent or mortgage. They don't compare insurance rates or refinance loans or question subscriptions. Because that feels small. That feels beneath someone at their level. Meanwhile, the low earner who builds wealth optimizes everything. Not because they're more disciplined, but because they have to. Every dollar matters when you don't have many. So they learn to find deals, to negotiate, to avoid fees, to minimize costs. These skills compound over time. And here's the paradox. A high earner who spent just 10% of their career optimization energy on spending optimization would build more wealth than doubling their income. But they never do it. Because it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like penny pinching. The quiet compounding. Here's where it all comes together. Wealth isn't built in the dramatic moments. It's built in the boring ones. It's built when you don't buy the thing you can afford, when you keep the car an extra 3 years, when you ignore the vacation everyone else is taking, when you say no 1,000 times to things that don't matter, so you can say yes once to something that does. And the magic, the part that changes everything, is time. Because money that sits still grows. Not quickly, not in a way you notice day to day, but consistently, relentlessly. 7% annual growth doubles your money every 10 years. That $8,000 a year the low earners save becomes $110,000 after 10 years if it's invested. After 20 years, it's $320,000. After 30, it's $670,000. The high earner who saved $5,000 a year, they have $420,000 after 30 years. Still good, but they earned nearly 4 times as much over that period and they ended up with less. And if the high earner didn't invest it, if they just kept it in a savings account because they were too busy working, too focused on the income treadmill, they have $150,000. 30 years of high income, and they barely have 2 years of living expenses saved. But let's look at what happens if that low earner increases their savings rate even slightly. If they save $10,000 a year instead of 8, after 30 years at 7% growth, they have $944,000. They're nearly a millionaire on an income that never exceeded $40,000. The difference between financial struggle and financial freedom wasn't income. It was $2,000 a year. It was saying no to things that cost $167 a month. One nice dinner out per month, one subscription service, one small unnecessary expense. That's the entire gap between broke and wealthy. Not millions in income, just $167 in monthly discipline. Here's where the math gets even more brutal. When you have no margin, any disruption destroys you. The high earner, living on $95,000 of their $100,000 income, has $5,000 in annual margin. If they lose their job, they have maybe a few months before catastrophe. And they can't cut expenses quickly because everything is locked in. The lease is signed, the car payment is due, the subscriptions are on autopay, the lifestyle has hardened. The low earner saving $8,000 on a $32,000 income has margin everywhere. If they lose their job, they can cut deeper. They can move to a cheaper place because they weren't maximizing to begin with. They can survive on even less because they've been practicing frugality all along. But more importantly, the low earner who's been saving for years has a cushion. They have months or years of expenses already saved. They can lose a job and barely flinch. The high earner loses a job and panics immediately because everything collapses without that next paycheck. This is why wealth is freedom, and income is not. Income is a leash. It keeps you working because you have no choice. Wealth is options. It lets you walk away from things that don't serve you. Most high earners believe they're preparing for retirement. They have a 401k. They contribute something. Maybe their employer matches. They see the balance growing and assume they're on track. But they're not calculating based on their actual lifestyle. They're calculating based on rules of thumb. Save 10%, save 15%, whatever the article said. If you spend $95,000 a year, you need approximately $2.4 million to retire comfortably using the 4% rule. If you're saving $5,000 a year, even with growth, you're not getting there. You'll reach retirement age and discover you have maybe 20 to 30% of what you actually need. So you keep working, not because you want to, but because you have to. And you resent the low earner who retired early, never understanding that they didn't need as much because they never spent as much. The low earner spending $24,000 a year needs $600,000 to retire. That's achievable. That's reachable with consistent saving over a career. And because their lifestyle stayed lean, retirement doesn't feel like deprivation. It feels like continuation. There's a moment that happens, usually in your 40s or 50s, when high earners look around and realize they're not wealthy. They've made millions over their career, and they have almost nothing to show for it. The house has a mortgage, the cars are financed, the retirement account is thin, and if the income stopped tomorrow, everything collapses in months. That's the moment when the treadmill metaphor becomes real. You've been running for decades, and you're exactly where you started. Tired, but not ahead. The low earner who saved quietly doesn't have that moment. They have the opposite. They check their accounts one day and realize they're wealthy. Not rich in the flashy sense, but free. Free to stop working. Free to take risks. Free from the treadmill entirely. And the strangest part is that no one around them knows. They still live in the same modest way. Still drive the same car. Still shop the same places. But internally, everything has changed. They have what the high earner desperately wants and can't buy. They have options. This realization moment is devastating for high earners because it comes with math. They calculate how many more years they need to work. They see the gap between their lifestyle and their savings. And they understand, often for the first time, that they're trapped. They built a beautiful cage and locked themselves inside. Some of them make changes. They start saving aggressively, cutting expenses, trying to catch up. But it's psychologically brutal. They're moving backward in lifestyle while their peers continue forward. They feel like they're failing even as they're finally doing the right thing. Others don't change. They decide it's too late, that they're too far behind, that they'll just work until they can't. They accept the treadmill as permanent, and they spend their remaining career years resenting the system, the costs, the unfairness, never quite accepting that it was always a choice. There's one more layer to this that reveals everything. High earners often leave almost nothing to their children. Low earners who build wealth leave fortunes. The dentist making $300,000 dies with debt. The janitor making $35,000 leaves millions. And the children inherit more than money. They inherit the pattern. The high earners' children grow up with lifestyle expectations. They assume a certain level of living is normal. They expect help with college, with weddings, with home down payments. And when the money isn't there, when they discover their high-earning parents are broke, it's shocking. It breaks their model of how the world works. Low earners' children grow up with different expectations. They learn to live on less. They watch their parents save. They inherit not just money, but the habits and identity that created it, and they carry it forward. This is how generational wealth actually builds, not through high income, but through high savings rate. Not through looking wealthy, but through being wealthy. So what do you actually do with this? First, break the link between income and lifestyle. When you earn more, act like you didn't. Keep living at your previous level for as long as possible. Treat raises and bonuses like they don't exist. Route them directly to investments before you ever see them. Because once your lifestyle expands, it never contracts without pain. Second, build an identity around keeping, not earning. Stop finding pride in your salary. Start finding pride in your savings rate. In your net worth. In the gap between what you could spend and what you actually spend. That gap is freedom. That gap is power. Make it your scoreboard. Third, automate the escalator. Set up systems that move money away from your spending account before you can touch it. Monthly transfers, automatic investments, whatever removes the decision from your daily life. Because willpower is finite, but systems run forever. Fourth, change your peer group or at least your reference point. Stop comparing yourself to people based on what they spend. Start comparing yourself to people based on what they keep. Find the quiet wealthy, not the loud rich. Model their invisibility. Fifth, practice lifestyle immunity. Actively resist upgrades. Keep the car longer than you need to. Stay in the smaller place even after you can afford bigger. Treat frugality as a skill you're developing, not a sacrifice you're making. Because it is a skill, and it's more valuable than any degree. The high earner stays broke because they're running on a treadmill designed to go nowhere. The low earner builds millions because they stepped onto an escalator and let time do the work. The difference was never about how much came in. It was always about what happened next. And that's the only part you actually control.